Okay, so I think that's going to be the majority of attendees, and I'll continue to add people as they come in, but just wanted to quickly introduce myself. My name is Stuart. I'm the marketing manager here at Optimum. Thank you all for joining today's webinar. Just to give you a quick kind of overview, we're going to be joined today by Mark Davis, who's one of our Microsoft specialists. Mark's going to be talking you through Power BI. As mentioned in the e-shot that you received and subscribed to the webinar from, this is basically a taster session of a new Power BI course that we've put together. We've found that Power BI has become particularly popular within the last kind of 2 to 3 years, and hence the requirement for this particular course. So we'll share some additional detail about that at the end. And again, the email that we'll kind of follow up with on Monday will have detail about how you can potentially subscribe to receive one of the kind of full courses. But for now, I'll pass over to Mark. And again, if you've got any questions, feel free to just add them to the conversation part and we'll scoot through some at the end.
Thanks, Stuart. Hi, guys. Welcome to you all. As Stuart has just said, if you do have any questions at any point, please do feel free to drop us a line. Yeah, like we can use the chat box to certainly do that. There's no question about that at all. So like I say, feel free to do so. So again, really, as Stuart has mentioned, this is just going to say hi to all of you guys. This is a taster for Power BI. What I'm going to do is go through, let me just show you the PowerPoint presentation, just a very simple PowerPoint presentation that I've set up. You've probably already seen the Power BI flyer, so you've got an awareness of this. So this is that 30-minute webinar taster session. And what I will be doing is I will just discuss very briefly each of these 4 bullet points that we've got there. So I'll talk very briefly about what Power BI is. We'll actually then get into Power BI, get into the application itself. Really importantly, we have to connect to data, and that data can be a variety of different data sources, which is really rather wonderful. We will potentially have to, or you guys, myself, whomever who's using Power BI will potentially have to clean that data. Otherwise, we can't think about it. I kind of assume to some extent that you guys use Excel. You probably use Excel to some extent, and I guess you might do some kind of visualizations in Excel. And what you may need to do before you get a nice, clean, neat, tidy Excel list is to clean that data. So you might be aware of text to columns and, I don't know, text or string functions, for example, in Excel to do that, so that you've got a nice, neat, tidy list from which you can create a pivot table and then potentially a pivot chart. Because, of course, a pivot chart in Excel is effectively a visualization of that data. And you can kind of go, I guess, to a certain kind of level, but Power BI is so much more powerful than that. I've been using Excel, I think, as Stuart has mentioned, for many years. I've done a fair amount of business intelligence as well using Tableau, which you guys may be aware of, using Alteryx for cleaning data, using Nime Analytics, which is an open source analytics platform as well. And over the last several years, in fact, more and more people, more and more users using Power BI, which is, of course, what this webinar is all about. So they're the 4 kind of bullet points that I'll be discussing very briefly. What I also want to do, I've got various other screens open as well. So, for example, as far as that whole kind of visualization thing is concerned, let me go to another tab. You may have already come across this particular web page. This is a typical kind of Microsoft thing, and I just want to point out this. This is Microsoft description. What is Power BI? You can unify data. So you can take data from a multitude of different data sources to create an interactive, immersive dashboard. The great thing about Power BI, and again, it's so much more powerful than Excel, is that interactivity, and we'll see that happen very briefly when I demonstrate a couple of reports to you guys that I've already created. And then what I will do, having shown you a couple of quite cool reports, very basic, very simple, but quite cool reports to give you a little bit of a flavor of Power BI and that whole kind of interactivity thing, what we'll then do is to create one kind of completely from scratch. So we don't have much time, so I'd like to get straight into it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a particular report that I've already created. Again, as I mentioned, it's fairly straightforward, it's fairly simple. So I've got 3 pages. or 3 tabs. So think about that whole kind of Excel thing where you're switching between your tabs, for example. So this is already connected to data. This is a typical Power BI interface with tabs and ribbons. Really, really importantly indeed, towards the top left corner here, we have the model or the report itself, which contains different data sets. It could contain just a single data set, so from a single Excel workbook, or from a CSV, or from a text file, or an Access table, whatever. That's the wonderful thing. You can kind of mix and match all of these different data sources. You can see the various columns that I've got, fields within the tables. So these are all the tables that I've connected to. They just happen to be Excel spreadsheets in this particular case. What is also rather cool, you guys might be aware of, you might actually use Access databases or SQL, for example. And what you can do, of course, you can create relationships. So if we had flat file worksheets from Excel, for example, or CSVs or whatever, this is how cool Power BI is, because it has done all that for me. It's created all of the relationships for me. Now, I appreciate, okay, it's not always going to do that, but what you guys will be able to do ultimately is to do it yourself manually if Power BI doesn't do it automatically. But let the tool, let the app do some of the work for you. Let me just go back to the model or the report itself. Yeah, so several tabs with different data displayed in various different ways. A little bit more complex potentially. Where's that other report I've got here? So for example here, quite a bit more complex in fact. I've got this dashboard demo idea just to kind of very briefly once again show you what all this interactivity is all about. So this particular report, this dashboard contains tables, it contains a bar chart, it contains cards, it contains a variety of different Power BI visualizations. And here is the visualizations panel over on the right hand side, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail when I start to create one completely from scratch, just to show you exactly how you can get started with Power BI. The interactivity, again, very, very simple. If, for example, here I've got the row profit, so it looks like there's data being connected to. And in fact, you actually might recognize this data if you've got any familiarity with Microsoft products generally and the data samples that they display, you can download them from wherever. So for example, AdventureWorks, what else like Contoso, the Northwind database, for example, that is been used in Access sample data for many, 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 many years indeed. I always use this sample data. I don't create my own. Now, I create my own reports, of course, but everybody's got access to this. So it's much, much better to effectively use almost like open source data. Everyone can download this data from a Microsoft website or from wherever else, for example, as well. Like I say, you might already be familiar with it. It's much, much nicer to use open source data. So for example, I've got Europe and North America and South America. Now, if I want to kind of drill down, if I want to demonstrate quickly and easily that interactivity, watch what happens when I click Europe. And we see something like that, or I click North America. And that's the power of Power BI, literally. You know, I can create wonderful dashboards like this, even more complex potentially, for example. It's so very easy to drill down. I've got a filter by year apparently here. At the moment, for example, I want to look at the data for 2017 and 2017 only. I can it's so the user interface, the UIX, the user experience, it's just so very nice. You can kind of do some of that with Excel. So for example, what I could do is if I pop to Excel, something you guys may have done previously. You open up a particular data set, something like this. For example, you click Insert, you click Pivot Table, and you click OK. And you get your pivot table kind of layout, and you decide, oh, what would I like to do? I'd like to use the line total broken down by category name. And then you do a little bit of formatting. You do something like that very quickly. And I guess that's the power of pivot tables in Excel. So incredibly simple to do. And then you create a pivot chart. And you do something like that. And you get a certain amount of interactivity, but really nowhere near as much as this. Nowhere near as much as that. So what I'm going to do is, how do you achieve something like that? Well, maybe not quite as complex as that in 20 minutes or so, but I can certainly give you a little bit of a flavor. So I'm going to click File, and I'm going to click New, and I'm going to create a brand new pivot table report. by default, and if you've already downloaded Power BI and kind of played around with it, you'll see the splash screen as you start up, and what you'll generally tend to see is a typical kind of welcome screen, and the welcome screen will look something like this. So this is going to happen. Power BI, the application is starting. It's very complex. Again, it will depend upon the power of your machine, your laptop, your desktop, or whatever else, for example. It's a pretty complex application. Getting into it just now. So this is the kind of default setup. You'll get this welcome screen, which you can disable if you so wish. And I'm just going to close that down for the moment. I'm actually logged into my Power BI account. Let me just close down that welcome screen. So this is a typical kind of Power BI interface, a UI, graphical user interface. What you've got is typical tabs and ribbons, as per usual in most of these Microsoft applications nowadays. You've got the Visualisations panel and the Fields panel or panes over on the right-hand side. You've also, really importantly as well, you've got the Model or Report tab, which is basically where we are at the moment. You've got the Data tab. Of course, I don't have any data connected to my Power BI report just yet. And you'll also have the Model or the Relationships tab as well, or icons down this left-hand side. Within the Home tab, which is basically where I am in the Home ribbon, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get data. So I'm going to connect to an Excel spreadsheet or a CSV or an Access table or query or whatever else. If I knew it was an Excel workbook, I could just simply click Excel workbook here. What I'm actually going to do is to click Get Data, just so I can show you guys, everyone on the session, everyone on the call, the wide range, if you like, of data connections that you can make. As I've mentioned already, it could be an Excel workbook. There we go, Excel workbook, CSVs. You know, you've got a ton of stuff here that you can connect to. File, for example, Excel workbooks and databases, Access databases, etc. I'll just go back to all at the moment. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I've gone back to all, and there's that long list once again. And I'm going to connect, for the purposes of these demos, I'm going to connect to a text file. So I'll double click text stroke or slash CSV. And I'm going to use a particular data set. In fact, what I will do, this thing that we just had a look at in Excel, I'm just going to close it down for the moment. And I'm not going to save any changes to that particular. How do you create something like that, or even so much better than that in Power BI? Yeah. So I'm going to use this sample raw data. You can see very clearly it's a comma separated value file, but it can be whatever. Absolutely, there's a text file there, which I've set up. We'll be doing so much more of this stuff on the full day course, but let's open up that. So I'm connecting to the data that I want to visualize in some way, shape, or form. So it makes the connection to the CSV. It loads the data actually into the model itself. So it's doing its connection, it's establishing a connection apparently to the sample of raw data for the visualization. So I can do something like that in Excel, as we've just seen. But like I say, what about doing this in Power BI? So the connection is being made. And what will happen when the connection is made, because it is a CSV, Power BI is pretty clever to say the least. It says, oh, I think that's a comma separated value file. And indeed, in fact, that is what the delimiter is. But of course, I'm sure you've seen various other delimiters like this, spaces and tabs and semicolons, etc. I could choose at this particular point to simply just load the data into my report. But so I can give you a little bit of a flavor of the whole cleaning thing, what I'm going to do, and again, it's something that you guys may already have experience with, the Power Query Editor. To get to that from here, I simply click Transform Data. When I click Transform Data, that will automatically open up the Power Query Editor. You don't have to click Transform Data. You can always load the data in and then kind of go to the Transform Data button, click on it, get taken to the Power Query Editor. This is where all the cleaning happens. So you could, for example, decide this is pretty clean data anyway. I'm sure you appreciate that, just to kind of speed things up a little bit today. So this is pretty clean data. I might have done some cleaning in Excel anyway. Yeah, or a colleague of yours or a colleague of mine might have done so, for example. But if it's not that clean, like I say, this is where the magic happens. So I can choose to, for example, I might have blank rows at the top of the list. Yeah, I might have a mixture of UK and US dates. for example, all the kind of classic things that you might come across. So like I say, this is where the magic happens, which is also really rather incredible to say the least. If you have a look at the panels over on the right hand side, if you have a look at the query settings, every single thing I do will become a new step in the kind of workflow, if you like. And if I decide I actually want to kind of go back a step, I can simply press the X to delete that particular step, to kind of devolve, or I can evolve. I can do that, for example. So like I say, again, that's where the magic of cleaning happens. Once you've done your cleaning, what you will then do is close and apply. Give it a moment or two. Again, Power BI does whatever it needs to do in the background. There are pending changes in your queries that haven't been applied. It is doing that at the moment for me. And there we go. Loading in. All of my columns or fields will appear over on the right hand side in that fields panel or that fields pane. So there's, again, magic happening. I keep on using that word, but I'm just so impressed. I mean, over the years, like I say, I've got loads of experience with Tableau, for example. Yeah, it's a great application. It really is good. But Power BI, I think it's getting in there. They are doing so much stuff, Microsoft, with business intelligence nowadays. Okay, anyway, let's go back to this. So this is the fields panel over on the right hand side. This is the table that I've just brought in, and these are all the columns or fields. Collapse that down for the moment. These are the various visualizations, column charts, bar charts, for example. We've got tables, we've got slices, which you may be familiar with, of course, in Excel. We've got cards, so many things. In fact, here, as I just mentioned, we've got a bar chart, we've got some slices or filters going on, we've got some tables, we've got some cards, for example. All those elements are taken from here somewhere. I'll just collapse that down again for the moment. So this is the reports. This is the data. There is only one data set, but again, it could be multiple. One data set with multiple columns. And this is the relationships or the model window. So if we had multiple tables, multiple data sets connected to Power BI, they would all appear here. And again, if you've got any experience with Access, guys, and queries, you'll recognize this kind of layout or this kind of setup. Collapse these down, give yourself a little bit more screen real estate. Okay, so I've made a connection. I've potentially transformed that data using the Power BI query. If I want to do any further transformations, because it's still maybe not quite as clean as I would like it to be, I simply in or on the Home tab and the Home ribbon in the Queries group, I would click Transform Data. Not going to bother doing so, but that would take you back to your Power Query editor. What I am now going to do is I am going to take a particular table, the sample raw data for visualization in Excel. I'm going to expand it so I can see all the columns or fields that are available. And again, Power BI, pretty clever to say the least. It makes decisions about which particular columns or fields or measures, as they're sometimes called, are as far as the data is concerned. So you can see there's numbers there, the line total, the quantity is unit price, for example. You can see there's an order date, little kind of calendar icon, and pretty much everything else in there. In fact, everything else in there is text. If it makes the wrong decision and you want to change the data type, transform data, go to the Power BI query editor, and you can do all that stuff there. Okay, so the visualization itself, you can do it in a number of different ways. I guess like any of these applications nowadays, yeah, you could do it this way or you can do it that way. And every one of you guys, we all have our own kind of personal preferences. So I could start using the fields panel, or I could collapse that down, and I could start from here using the visualizations panel or pane. Let's use the fields panel for the moment. So what I would generally tend to do in a pivot table in Excel, for example, is I would say, well, okay, which particular measure do you want to analyze? Yeah, the actual number itself, effectively. So what I would do here, for example, if I'm going to go through that whole kind of philosophy, that whole process, that whole workflow, I would tick or check line total. Give it a moment or two, and there is my first visualization, which I can move and I can resize and I can copy or paste. Really very, very easy indeed to do. just a Control-C, Control-V, for example. I can even, of course, create multiple pages, and ultimately that is what we will do, create multiple pages, because you won't have all of your visualizations on one page. You'll have your dashboard kind of across multiple pages potentially. It will completely depend upon the complexity of your Power BI report. Okay, if I want to change the visualization here, I can easily do that. I'll collapse down a little bit of extra screen real estate, just open up this visualizations panel. You can kind of see from the various icons, the various visualization icons here, which particular one is selected. But I would prefer a bar chart, for example, instead. So there we go. There's a bar chart. Now it's only one number, of course, at the moment. So that's the measure. Now I've got to decide upon the particular dimension that I want to use. So what I will do is expand my fields, and let's say, for example, got it here. There's my line total. Nice kind of clue, obvious that something has been included in that particular visualization. If I click away from it, all kind of context sensitive, typically with these Microsoft applications. Okay, so I'm going to break it down by, for example, the category name. So I'm making sure that the visualization that I want to modify is selected, and I click my dimension. And there we go, there it is. For example, move, resize. I can even, here, closing down, opening up my visualizations once again. So these are the fields and exactly how the viz has been laid out. And this little kind of paint roller that you've got here is format. And there's tons of formatting that you can do in here. Again, we'll leave that for the full day, and we'll kind of go much more, of course, into the aesthetics of the thing. Okay, let me just click away for the moment. So that particular visualization is not selected. The other method, the other way that you would do it, is to choose the visualization. So let's say, for example, let's do a table this time. Okay, so there's my table. Again, I can move and resize, and then I go to my fields, and then I expand, and then I choose my line total, for example. And then I decide to break it down by, let's do category name once again. If I so wish, I can go to my visualizations, and I can click and drag to move things around. I guess very, very similar to what you do in Excel pivot tables. You know, you're kind of clicking and dragging from rows to columns to values, etc. And then again, of course, good old column widening and resizing, for example. So there's the data itself, and there is the visualization based upon it. Now you can copy and paste. If you've done quite a bit of formatting, for example, you've changed from, I don't know, Calibri to Times New Roman or whatever else, and you want to kind of keep that formatting, I would always recommend copying and pasting tables. Otherwise, you'd have to kind of repeatedly format. I'm sure that makes sense. I want to see some of that interactivity that we saw here. So for example, we saw Europe. I think, right, okay, what I want to do is I want to kind of hone in on, I want to see what's happening in Europe. So I click Europe, and the filtering happens, and you can see total sales for Europe, total profit for Europe in that top left corner is now different, of course, to what it was across all three continents effectively. Let's go back. So how do you do something like that? How do you kind of incorporate that interactivity? Well, let's do it with something else. Let's say, for example, let's do a column chart. So I create a clustered column chart, blank or empty at the moment. Let's go for this time, the guys who work for us are employees, sales guys. Now let's move that over here and drag it down some. And then let's see how these guys are doing with our profit margin or line total or whatever it happens to be, for example. Let's actually switch that around. We've got a similar bit of consistency across. Again, what you might choose to do, you might decide, of course, at some point to go click and select the visualization itself, click format, and you might want to change, for example, the colors, because you want some kind of contrast, for example, which makes it much more kind of readable. Differentiates between the different data sets that you're using, or perhaps more accurately, the different visualizations based upon the data sets. So one is the line total by category name, one is the line total by employee name. And this is where this kind of stuff happens. So I click North America, everything changes. I click North America, that removes the filter, and I could do exactly the same here. So if, let's say, for example, one of these sales guys, so you may recognize Nancy from the Northwind database, Puntos or AdventureWorks and so on. If I click Nancy, well, I can even just see the wonderful little tooltip, employee name Nancy, that's her line total, that's her total sales. I click her, and then the whole visualization changes, the whole report changes to reflect the fact that I've just clicked and selected Nancy or Nancy only. This is Andrew, for example. If I click Andrew again, it kind of removes the filtering that I've switched on. Or what I want to do is to see how these guys are doing across the various categories. So let's say, for example, I don't know, our beverages. So I click beverages, and of course it works in the, as it were, opposite direction, for example, as well. And again, it's that kind of interactivity that you could potentially do, well, you can potentially do with Excel and pivot tables and VBA and charts and so on and so forth, for example. But that kind of click and see is just so quick and so easy. So very, 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 very easy to do. So what we've actually seen, what we've seen on this particular, on this very, 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 very short session, this very, very, very short taster session, is a very, very, very gentle kind of introduction to Power BI, and I'm hoping that you guys can get a feel for it. And I would always kind of recommend as well, if you haven't downloaded Power BI already, do that and play and experiment, and that is what we will do on the one-day course as well. Of course, we'll take it so much further than that. So much further than I've possibly been able to go over the last 15 or 20 minutes or so. We'll create far more complex Power BI reports with multiple pages and heaps of different other visualizations from the visualizations panel. We'll look again and check out this. I've got multiple tables in here with multiple columns in here, for example, and we'll look at much more cleaning, and we'll look at relationships, for example, in much more detail, because relationships are an incredibly important part of a Power BI report.
Great, thanks so much, Mark. I've got a couple of questions that people have added into the comments. So if we could quickly scoot through them, would that be okay?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So the first one we've got is Mike, who has asked, if you have disparate data sources, does Power BI help you build a data warehouse as a single repository of that data, or is it limited to pulling the data from the disparate sources each and every time you refresh the report? So I guess it's probably the second one there, isn't it? It's not creating effectively one warehouse here. It's just going to, each time you open the report, it's going to pull the data from those disparate sources.
Exactly, absolutely correct, absolutely correct. So that's it is exactly as you say, Stuart and Mike. It's the second part of it. From those disparate data sources, the CSVs and the text files and the SQLs and the Access databases and whatever else, a whole kind of mix match of different disparate sources. Then, you'll be refreshing each time. Yeah.
Right. Okay, that kind of leads us on to the next question from Daniel, actually, who's asked, does Power BI import the data or read it live? How frequently can you refresh the data if the source is a database? So do you have to go and manually refresh that, or does it happen each time you open Power BI? Or how does that work?
So it's very, very similar to, so for example, like pivot tables in Excel, you have to refresh pivot tables manually. That's why I'm basically not a big fan of pivot tables. I would always use something like SUMIFs and COUNTIFs and so on and so forth, for example. But you can change the various settings in your data source settings, for example, within Power BI, and that is something that we'll definitely have a look at in a bit more detail, if and when, and hopefully you guys, we meet again sometime in the future.
Great. Okay. Just for everyone else on the call, what I've done is I've added my email address into the chat. So I'm stuart.curtis@optimum.co.uk. If you've got any questions that you'd like to follow up on, then please feel free to send them over to this and we'll try to come back to you individually. Alternatively, if you'd like to book that one-day course or potentially have a look at the kind of broken down areas in a bit more detail of what's going to be covered in that course, then please feel free to reach out. As I said at the start, we've recorded today's session. So what we'll do is we'll send around a recording on Monday. If anyone would like to reach out on the back of that again, of course, you're more than welcome to do so. But for now, that's it for today's session. Thank you all very much for joining us, and we hope you have a great rest of the day.
Yeah, same for me. Thanks, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.